I'm Allan Dodds Frank. Welcome to Unvarnished. The executives make tens of millions of dollars, they behave like fraternity boys, and they don't pay any taxes.
We're watching our country sort of crumble.
This is a show I'm doing with Lianna and Nielsen that we hope will be a two-generation look at what's wrong with the world today. The government should not be in the business of making winners and losers. It's here to protect all of us.
They don't acknowledge that these horrible atrocities have happened at their hands.
What's going on in politics and business, and who's trying to steal your money. Welcome to Unvarnished. I'm Allan Dodds Frank with my co-host Lianna Nielsen. This is going to be a show about business, politics, what's going on in the world, and what you need to know to protect your money. We're going to take a two-generation look at what's happening. Lianna?
Great to be here, Allan.
So glad you're joining me. So
Thank you.
can tell me what your generation is doing. I have a clue of understanding it, and I'll tell you all the bad stuff my generation has been doing to yours without you even knowing.
Maybe you can tell us how to fix it.
Yeah, well, we're going to take care of all the generations between us who are now probably maneuvering to be the next rulers of the evil empire. When I was your age, presidents try to consider experience, wisdom, and all that stuff. Now they try to pick someone who is the political persuasion they hold, who is as young as they can possibly put on the court, since it's a lifetime appointment. Because unlike a presidential election of 4 years, a Supreme Court justice can last 30 or 40 years. And that's a frightening prospect when you think about how few vacancies there are. We'll see if it becomes a big issue in the election. To me, it's critically important because the court is already stacked in favor of the conservatives, at least 5-4. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is a liberal justice appointed by a Democratic president, is quite ill. She's essentially hanging on, hoping President Obama is reelected so he will then appoint someone of her political persuasion to replace her. But absent that, especially with 6 Catholics on the court, women's rights, whether it's equal pay, abortion, you name it, the whole array of these issues are going to be probably set back decades, at least from the point of view of, say, my mother, my wife, and my twins.
That's the scariest thing about that whole issue is abortion rights. I can't imagine that being something that is overturned. Women of my generation, it's just accepted that, you have rights with your body, and it just seems crazy to me that Republicans talk so much about making the government smaller, but then you want to make decisions about my body?
Right. Well,
that doesn't make any
the
sense.
Supreme Court. Our first guest is going to be an old friend of mine named Michael Holland, who is actually a Wall Street legend, has worked for many of the biggest investment banks, and he now runs his own fund, the Holland Balanced Fund, $4 billion overseas under management. And his funds seem to always make money, and not in a Bernie Madoff way. Everything he has is fully disclosed. The stocks actually exist.
And so you've known him for what, 20 years?
20 years. I first met him when I was a business correspondent on ABC television and then CNN. And he subsequently, in the last 20 years, has been a guest on hundreds of business shows. He is one of the most sought after commentators because he makes sense. He speaks simple English and he gives you insights that should be obvious to you, but I guarantee you, until you hear them, they won't have been obvious. And our special guest, Michael Holland, one of the wizards of Wall Street, and one of the really few honest wizards of Wall Street. Anyway, what is your take about what happens in the world? The subject we've often talked about is terrorism. How much difference does it make that Osama bin Laden is now dead?
So I knew you would bring up Osama bin Laden simply because a year before he did the worst thing that New York has ever experienced, you were talking about him, and who was this guy Osama bin Laden? Why were you spending time talking about him? So yes, congratulations, you found him. You didn't kill him, but you found him. I think what, unfortunately for President Obama, the wonderful thing of finally causing an end to that chapter that sordid chapter in our lives is that, if anything, he has been replaced by others, and apparently very well replaced.
What's going on in Egypt? Does that make you think this is a more promising sector? You pay more attention to news in Egypt?
I think now we're beginning to get a sense that the Muslim Brotherhood, the Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, if anything, look to be a little stronger and more active than they were just 6 months ago. So I'm not in any way reassured by what's going on in the Middle East, no.
Well, do you steer away from, say, energy stocks, oil companies, because of this inherent uncertainty?
The opposite direction. I actually go into them, because when you have these perturbations from bad people in the Middle East, when things happen, the Straits of Hormuz are closed up or whatever, energy stocks, commodity stocks generally go up. So it's a little bit of an insurance policy.
Now, how will the outcome of this election influence the investing climate in your view?
This time around, I think what the market is saying is, if you have someone in the White House who actually does what Romney has said he would do, that would be a good thing for business generally. Fine. Having said that, I don't think that the market, until a week or two before the election, is actually going to pay a lot of attention in terms of real dollars. The market, I love the market because it's not political. It's totally driven by greed and opportunity. And so it's not liberal, it's not Democrat, and so it says, okay, we know that we can get a surprise in the last week or two before the election. That's what politicians do. Campaigns are lining up their surprises right now. And I think that the market is smart enough to know that.
How do you view billionaires? Do you like investing with them? Is this scooping up behind the elephant to be in showbiz, or what are we talking about?
I think that, surprise, surprise, not all billionaires are alike. And I think that some are people you would like to be partners with. Read that Warren Buffett. I've owned his stock for many years and wouldn't call myself, I actually worked for him at one point at Salomon Brothers. He's someone who, despite the fact he's made billions of dollars, continues to wake up every morning trying to figure out how can I make some more money, and that's a good thing. And he tends to do it in an ethical way. So that's a good thing. There are other billionaires, probably some in Russia, that I wouldn't want to be a partner with.
Well, pick an American one, like...
what's wrong with the Russians?
The Russians are fine, but how about
they're actually
Donald Trump?
thieves.
How about somebody with a TV show, who may or may not be a billionaire, by the way? But
Yeah.
would you invest in anything that Donald Trump ran, except as a short?
I've never invested. I've been involved in situations where some of his bonds are owned, but I've never invested with Donald Trump.
So we'll take that as a not so far. Let's take some household names. Apple. What do you think of that stuff?
I own it. I've owned it for a long time. It's had a huge run. So if someone didn't own it today, the best professional recommendation someone would probably have is, you wouldn't, if you had $100 to invest in Apple, you wouldn't invest it all today. Invest, because you want to own it 10, 20, 30, 40, $50 of the $100, and wait till the stock came down. If it came down, if it didn't come down, you'd make money. So that's usually a pretty sensible way of. But I think the company has, despite the fact it's run a long way in large part because the company has done unbelievable things. So there are plenty of people I respect who are saying the stock is kind of a classic blow-off in terms of it's done so well, expectations are so high for the company, you shouldn't think of owning it now. I actually don't agree with that, or I would sell it. So I guess with my actions I'm saying. And the reason for that is back to the common sense, and that's how much is the market valuing this at. If they're going to earn over $50 and the stock is under 700, 70 divided by 5 is 14 times earnings. 14 times earnings, that valuation level is a very low level for a company, any company, if you just or pedestrian. So for a company which I think still has very good prospects, it's a very low valuation. So I own it. That's why I own it.
No, I was going to ask about Facebook actually. That being said, a product that you use that you think is a great product, and Facebook now hitting 1 billion users.
Right.
I know they had a disappointing IPO. What are your thoughts about where that's going to go?
again, back to valuation, Leanne, it's the whole point of investing is figuring out where to go in. You can buy the world's greatest company, but if you buy it at a huge price, there was something called the Nifty 50 in the 1970s where companies were at 40, 50, 60, 70 times earnings. In other words, and I just talked about Apple being 14 times earnings. Facebook is still 35, 37 times earnings. So it's still, even now, after it's come so far down from the initial public offering, it's still very expensive compared to Apple and Google. Google and Apple are trading like less than 1/2 of the valuation, if you will, of Facebook. That doesn't make sense to me.
Why is that happening?
The market's not always rational, and when it's irrational, in both directions, I think it was fair to say that a year ago, that a lot of things were priced ridiculously low, including Apple and Google. When Facebook came, it came at 100 times earnings. That doesn't make sense. And when you had Apple and Google trading at that time 12 times earnings. So for anyone who just was totally dispassionate about this, you can be dispassionate about stocks just as you can about elections. You don't have to participate emotionally. You can just say what makes sense. And if you like Obama's agenda or you like Romney's agenda, you go for that. And if you like stocks that are trading at 100 times because you think they'll trade at 200, I mean, it just doesn't make sense for me. But dispassionately, you say, here's something that's a really attractive property. Think of it as real estate, and it's trading at 1/10 or 1/12 of what this thing across the street is trading. It doesn't make sense. So it's just their numbers.
It's fashion in part, in a sense, the Facebook. Let's take a couple of unfashionable stocks. One of which I know you at least owned in Holland Balance Fund when I last looked.
Because I'm unfashionable?
No. Because you believe in real companies. Microsoft.
Yep.
Why do you still like that?
It's still one of the world's strongest franchises. They still have a very good business which throws out a mountain of cash flow, and it's trading at a very low valuation. I always start with valuation. And I think to own a great company at a fair price, as Warren Buffett says, is always an attractive thing to do, as opposed to owning a fair company at a great price.
Hewlett-Packard lost $4 billion in market value yesterday because Meg Whitman said their prospects for the next couple of years are grim in almost every product line. Would you look at this as a bottom fisher or something that's even though it's a huge company, in a death spiral?
When I buy stocks, I buy a stock because I think you can make money, not because it's really cheap. Sometimes the biggest mistakes I've made, let's talk about that, that's a better way to look. The biggest mistakes I've made have been trying to do things like that. And there are cliches about it. It's like catching a falling sword, but the reality is that in a case like Hewlett-Packard, there's such a long history of defeat and disappointment, going all the way back to their original purchase of when they bought Compaq Computer. That was a ridiculously bad acquisition. I hated it at the time. I used to own Hewlett-Packard back in the day before that. And when they did it, it's like, what is the board thinking? And then you just pile on acquisition after acquisition. And then you go through the people who've run the company. It's like a rogues gallery. And this is actually, I don't know any of the people on the board. I probably should take a look. But it's one of the worst board series of actions I've ever seen in an American company, in any company.
So board governance matters.
Oh yeah, well, take a look at Hewlett-Packard. They're a great example, because what they've approved over the years in terms of acquisitions, huge acquisitions, which were billed as transformative. They were transformative. They transformed the company into a crummier company, and then on top of that, they brought in CEOs who made no sense. Mr. Apotheker, anyone remember him?
Yeah.
He was there for it.
Besides Microsoft and besides Apple, what are things that I should be investing in as a young person to hold over time?
Stuff that you actually use if you know how to do the financial part of it. If you really like Apple, for example, you like its products, and then you find a price at which you think it's an attractive thing to own, then you start buying it there.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Michael, thank you for explaining to Lianna and to me and to our viewers why the man behind the Holland Balance Fund is content just to be one of the top-rated fund managers in history. Anyway, Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really.
Thank you.
Lianna, did Michael Holland live up to my billing as one of the wise men of Wall Street?
Absolutely. He definitely knows his stuff. I enjoyed a lot of the stuff he was saying, especially when he was talking about really investing in products and in stocks where you love the company and you use the product. I mean, it's common sense, but I don't know if everyone always thinks about that. And I loved what he was saying about Facebook. You know, do the math.
He explained how you make the decision between two stocks you like, right? Say Apple and Google, or Apple and Facebook. What was his tip?
He was just saying, you know, if it's trading at something like 100 times the valuation, that's too high. It needs to be something more around.
Look at the earnings.
Look at the earnings. It needs to be more around like 12 or 14.
Anna, I'm glad you found Michael Holland as insightful as I do.
I did.
He's always great. It was wonderful to have him. That's it for now for Unvarnished. We'll be back soon with another hardcore look at business, politics, what to do with your money, what's wrong with the world. I'm Allan Dodds Frank with Lianna Nielsen. See you soon.